Hi, my name is Chris Parkhurst. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm also the host of the Documentary Life podcast, a show that spans 140 episodes, has been downloaded in over 135 countries, and I've been producing for about 5 years. I decided to put each and every episode up here onto YouTube to sort of expand the audience, and as we say in the show, maybe inspire and inform some more doc filmmakers, hopefully like yourself. In the episodes, you may find some older, maybe outdated URLs, in particular any of the documentary filmmaking courses that we do offer online. If you have any questions about the URLs, simply look in the show notes on this page, here on this YouTube page, and that'll be able to take you where you need to go to. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the show, and it's great to have another listener to the Documentary Life. Have a great day. Microphone check, 1, 2, 3. City, sibilance. Levels check, good, sounds good. 1, 2, 3, rolling and...
I think everyone should take a pause before they even start making a film as to thinking about who the audience might be for the film and how big that is and what the success of that, relative success of that might be based on the size of that audience.
Hello and welcome to the Documentary Life. This is a show that sets out to inspire and inform you on how to best live and lead your own documentary life. I am your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is episode number 124. And it is brought to you by the Doc Lifer Elite Mastermind, an exclusive weekly mastermind group where filmmakers come together for support, guidance, and empowerment to make their best doc films and lead their best doc lives. As you listen to today's episode, we are kind of in the middle of awards season, right? You've got the Independent Spirit Awards, the IDA Awards, the Oscars, the Golden Globes, although somehow the Golden Globes still don't have a category for Best Documentary, just to name a few. And certainly some major film festivals showcasing documentaries have been in play these days, like Sundance and Slamdance. And by the way, another quick shout out to fellow doc lifer Josh Davidsburg for getting his film into this year's Slamdance. We all know that film festivals play no small part in getting your film into a position of possible nominations for the aforementioned awards. We hear a lot from doc lifers that they'd like more information on film festivals. We see you talking about it on the TDL Community Facebook group. It's not a surprise. The film festival has long been an important and very gratifying part of the documentary filmmaker's life. See what I did there? Not unlike when you received that letter for being awarded a grant for your documentary, a similar notification from a festival can be an important part of our journey. It's some much-needed appreciation for all of the hard work that we've put in on our doc films. It's a feeling of recognition and acceptance into a community of our peers, and often a community that is difficult to get connected with. Which is why I'd like to talk with you today about some best practices for getting your doc into a film festival. So why don't we get right into 5 tips for getting your documentary into a festival. Number 1, give a good hook. Have you made your documentary all on your own in the Himalayan mountains of Nepal? Did you follow goats making a once-in-a-lifetime journey from their lives in Tibet to their sacrificial deaths in Nepal? If so, film festival people need to know this. And also, if this was the case, did you supply the festival with some awesome up-close and personal photos of these goats on the mountain path, or some behind-the-scenes footage of you as the one-person crew filming amidst hundreds of these goats? You get my drift here. Give a festival not only a reason to be hooked by you and your subject matter, but give them ways in which they might be able to promote you and your film in future social media platforms. Number 2, give good sound. We've talked about this many times throughout the life of this podcast. I've talked about this in our mastermind group, on our community Facebook page, during one-on-one consultations. The importance of sound. Or as I like to often say, sound over picture, which of course pisses off a lot of camera people, but that's fine. I'm a camera person myself. And you know what? It's the reality. Audiences are far more likely to forgive bad video than they are bad audio. Film festival programmers are the same way. If they're 5 minutes into your film and struggling with shoddy audio, they're going to move on to the next festival applicant before you can say Werner Herzog, because, Werner always has good audio. Make audio one of the absolute priorities of your filmmaking. And if you do have anything questionable audio-wise, get yourself a damn good post-audio person. There are many out there. I can even recommend a few. Number 3, enter festivals early. That's right, enter them often and enter them early. Festival submissions nowadays can cost anywhere from $25 to $75 US a pop. That's not fun. And don't even get me on where and how that money exactly gets used. But but it is just the way it is. Festivals are a business. We should be aware of this, but we should also accept this, embrace this, understand this. Most festivals have an early bird price, so this can be a good thing for you, especially if you're submitting to a great number of them. The costs incurred rise quickly when you're entering film festivals. But entering early also makes your film easier to program around. Think about it. If a festival programmer is getting a submission late in the application process, it simply is more difficult to squeeze in an entry than it is to build around one. Last thing I want to note here, don't just enter as many festivals as possible. It will get expensive and it will be a waste of yours and a festival's time if you haven't carefully looked through the guidelines as well as the types of films the festival typically runs. Number 4, evoke emotion. It's one thing for a documentary film to look good on paper. Just think of how many great ideas you or I have had probably in the past year alone. But paper is paper for a reason. You can write on it. You cannot film on it. Your doc must be able to evoke emotion. Simply put, your film cannot all come from the head. It must come from and must have heart. Find your voice and have something important to say, Doc Lifer. Festival programmers are looking to be moved. They want to laugh, cry, be inspired, or be angry. Not at you necessarily, but at, say, an injustice or climate change. The best way in which you can do this is to make sure that you have injected your voice. And I don't mean literally as in your narration. I mean your voice as in the way in which you tell us that you have something to say. And make your story personal. Give your audience something or someone that they can personalize and latch onto, be connected with, be emotional with or about. Number 5, use Film Freeway. I think that by now, most of us realize that the easiest, most straightforward way to submit your film to a host of different festivals is by using the Film Freeway platform. Film Freeway literally streamlines the entire process, not only for you, the filmmaker, but also the entity receiving your application on the other end, the festival programmer. The fact is, most festivals are now tied into Film Freeway, and you should be too. There is just little way around it. It is the number one way to enter film festivals. So why wouldn't you use the platform that most of the industry is using? So there you have it, Doc Lifer. 5 tips for getting your documentary into a festival. If you've got some tips of your own, feel free to share them with all of us in the Documentary Life Community Facebook group, or you can email me directly at chris@barongfilms.com. I always greatly appreciate hearing from you. Anyone who is a listener of this show knows how important the idea of community is to me. Discovering and nurturing a documentary community has always been at the heart of the documentary life. And last year, as an extension to this idea of community, we started our first ever Doc Lifer Mastermind group, a group led by Steph and myself that met weekly for 1.5 hours for 3 months to discuss all assets of documentary filmmaking and documentary living. The response to that first Doc Lifer Mastermind group was overwhelming, which, to be honest, was kind of what I thought might happen. I myself have been a part of mastermind groups and have experienced firsthand the benefits that come from being a part of a tightly knit group, all with similar interests, all holding one another accountable for meeting their goals. It's the type of supportive and inspirational engagement that you really can't get anywhere else. And so now, building upon the success of that first mastermind group, we are excited to announce our next mastermind group, which begins on Monday, March 2nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time here in the U.S. The Doc Lifer Mastermind Group is a group that holds one another accountable for weekly goals. It inspires and gives us all confidence to do our projects and to lead our doc lives. It is a community of like-minded individuals all sharing their same passion: documentary filmmaking. Just as was the case in our last group, this second group will consist of 4 to 6 carefully screened and selected doc lifers who will be able to discuss anything they'd like to discuss, either about a current doc project or their own doc life. Spaces are pretty limited. There are currently just 3 spots remaining. We want to make sure that you get the most out of your Doc Lifer Mastermind experience, and we know from our own experiences with masterminds that this kind of number will maximize that success. So if you think that you might like to participate in this next Doc Lifer Mastermind, please go to thedocumentarylife.com/mastermind and fill out our application. It's from these applications that we select those Doc Lifers who we think will most benefit from a mastermind group and who we think will make the best fit for this sort of supportive group. Again, the Doc Lifer Mastermind group begins on Monday, March 2nd at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. To apply, go to thedocumentarylife.com/mastermind. Steph and I hope you'll be a part of our next amazing group. John Reese is a critically acclaimed filmmaker, author, and media strategist. His experience releasing his documentary feature Bomb It with a hybrid strategy was the inspiration for writing Think Outside the Box Office, the first step-by-step guide for filmmakers to distribute and market their films. He has given workshops and spoken at conferences and festivals throughout the world. He has worked with and consulted for Paramount Pictures, Screen Australia, Film Independent, Creative Scotland, the South Australian Film Corporation, and numerous film schools and festivals. He is the year-round distribution and marketing lab leader at the IFP Filmmaker Labs. Reese also contributes to Filmmaker Magazine, Huffington Post, IndieWire, Screen Daily, Movie Maker Magazine, and other publications. You may remember, Doc Lifer, we had John Reese on the program back in Season 1. He also has conducted a webinar for us, which has since been placed in the archives of our Documentary Academy. We talked mostly about distribution platforms for the independent filmmaker, a lot, of course, which was also discussed in his book, Think Outside the Box Office. But today, I'd like to discuss something that you, John, touched upon at the end of our webinar, which is you were delving heavily into marketing and using online marketing tools and tactics and community outreach and local partnerships with grassroots organizations. You were using these tools to help filmmakers connect with the right audiences and the right distributors for their work. How does that sound, John? And welcome to the Documentary Life podcast again.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And it's like you have to, I'll just go, every film is different, and every film needs its own strategy. So I always start this off, since a lot of your audience are people making their first film, you always have to keep in mind on everything what your goals are. Yeah. Like I always just like to hammer that, because that's super important. And what your goals are will determine what your strategy is, not just for the distribution, but also for the marketing. Yeah. So, and then, there's a variety of different techniques, mostly boiling into, social media outreach press in terms of marketing. There's other things you can do as well, but those would be the 3 major buckets, I would say. And we can talk about them individually, in turn, kind of a thing, or like what do you feel like would be the most fruitful?
Well, all of the above for sure. And I think I'll start with a pretty softball question, which is how early on, and maybe explain a little bit the importance of how early on we doc filmmakers should be considering something like our marketing and distribution strategy, and why it's important to be thinking of these things early on.
Well, I think it's important to think about it early on. I think everyone should take a pause before they even start making a film as to thinking about, depending on what the goals are. If all you want to do is make a film about the subject and, gangbusters, no matter what, great. Just understand that, you should at least consider potentially who the audience might be for the film and how big that is and what the success of that relative success of that might be based on the size of that audience. And and it's kind of unknown at the beginning, but there's certain things that you can kind of suss out and get a sense of, right away, and you shouldn't just be making a film for people who like documentary films. It's probably too small of an audience to really sustain making films, or making the film. Like, you really have to think about who else besides the people who like documentary films might like this film. And every film, again, is different. Like, you have to and I would start, like, for instance, as a consulting producer on Desolation Center, which is a film about these desert music shows in California in the early 1980s. And, people who love each of the bands that were in the shows, people who love punk rock in general, people who like alternative music, so that they're getting a fair amount of support from people within the music industry for the film, but it's not all of the music industry. It's certain specific types of people. And they've been, they started their social media early because they did an early crowdfund campaign. They started their audience engagement early, and they've been a really good job about keeping that going through the life cycle of the film. For other people, that's hard. It's like, one of the things about social media, you don't really want to start it until you can keep it going. So, because it makes no sense to start it up and then let it die, or do a lot of work and then let it die. But just having a concept of who the audience is at the very beginning. And then somewhere in the beginning, middle-ish, like if you're doing a film that there's potential organizational partners involved, you can start reaching out to those people to say, you're working on this film. Is it something that's interesting to them? Can they get involved? You might even want to interview some of the principals, make them feel like they're involved in the process. And depending, again, on your goals and what you're trying to do with the film. And that will help lay the groundwork for doing outreach later. It can be a bit of a minefield because there's politics within many of the niches out there, and especially like health niches, environmental niches. There's, so you want to be careful about like who. Part of it is sussing out the landscape and seeing who, are the bigger players, who are the medium-sized players, who are the regional players, so that, you are strategic about how you approach your potential organizational partners. So that all being said, I don't think, so here's a couple things. I don't think it's super important to start social media on the film early. And the only reason to do it early is A, you like it, and B, you feel like you can talk about your subject for a while. And if you feel like you can talk about your subject without necessarily talking about and blowing all your media from your film, that's a good way to create audience, as long as there's an online audience who wants to be engaged around that. So that's also something to suss out. But the other thing I wanted to say is that at least no later start thinking about distribution and marketing than like rough cut.
Right.
I mean, if you're thinking about this when you're entering festivals, like that's like the last, if you're thinking about this after your festival premiere, you've already blown a lot of opportunities. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So, somewhere between, generally, especially for people who are early, or earlier in their careers, really do it in post so that because people make blunders in applying for festivals and their festival strategy all the time that could be prevented,
Right. Something that you mentioned in this is the idea of partnerships, and I'd like to explore that a little bit more. what do we mean when we talk about partnerships? Who should we be partnering with, and how can they help us in our marketing or our distribution later on?
Well, the purpose of partnerships is essentially partners, organizational partners. There's a couple different kind of partners, but the main kind are organizational partners. And those people generally in your film, if they exist, have a connection to your audience.
Yeah.
And so they have email lists, they have website, they have social media. And because they already have an audience that trusts them, and this is where it gets tricky, is they already have a relationship with their audience, and it's a matter of whether they want to open up that relationship to you.
Yeah.
Right. So, and some films, are great at this and do. I think I'm about to start working on a project advising them on their second stage of release, because they've done like a lot of amazing community screenings.
Yeah.
But then trying to figure out what to do next, because they have they have a wide variety of partners.
Okay.
And how to utilize those partners for the next part. So initially, partners can, help, as I said, interview. Maybe they're good. Maybe you need them for subjects for your interview or connecting to some of the people that you need to interview. But in terms of the release of the film, they can help, they can help organize screenings out of their own chapters if they have chapters. They can encourage their members to organize screenings. They can, help, if you're doing a crowdfund campaign and they're really supportive, they can help get the word out. Generally partners, and it depends on how you use partners depends on how involved they're going to be in your campaign. There's different value asks based on your goals, and you need to prioritize those. If you have a partner who will do multiple things, then that's great. But if you have a partner that's going to do one thing, what is that one thing that they're willing to do? So doing one tweet isn't going to be that effective. Having you in a monthly email blast that has lots of other things is more effective.
Yeah. Having
a dedicated email that's only about your film is super effective. And having multiples of any of those things is also super effective. Doing, posts together, doing some sort of live, Facebook Live or Instagram Live with them. There's all kinds of things that you can do, and it just depends on, what makes sense for them, what makes sense for you, and where you are at in your release. So, and you want to think about what are the high value aspects of your release that are most in line with your goals, and then that's how you want to organize your partnership involvement, your organizational partner involvement. So there's other kinds of partners. There's like influencers are essentially, and organizations are influencers, but there's also, there's influencers. They necessarily, I wouldn't call them a organizational partner. They're just influencers. But there's, people who have the ear of your audience, and you definitely also want to connect with those people as well. As far as other partnerships besides organizations, there's businesses, and that gets into sponsorship basically.
Right, and of course, there's differences between sponsorship and the partnership.
Yeah, so I mean, there's similarities, but generally, most organizations aren't going to give you money, but they'll give you support. Whereas what you're looking from businesses is potentially to give you money, for your release.
Right.
And then it's a matter of like, what's in it for them, and so a lot of this goes into, and this is something that I work with my clients, like what are you willing to give these organizations and or business partners, and what are you asking in return?
Yeah.
And making sure that it's a win-win situation. And especially you have to approach these organizations from the viewpoint that you are providing more value to them in a sense than they're providing to you, because they're the ones with the connection to the audience. They're the ones who have the trust of the audience. They're the ones who, that are taking a bigger risk in a sense than you are.
A lot of us, John, are uncomfortable with the notion of selling ourselves. But nowadays, to be an independent documentary filmmaker, I believe it's critical that we learn at least some basic ways in which to even begin branding ourselves and our films. So maybe you can give us some ways in which we can begin doing so, and or maybe even how we first get over this sort of fear of selling ourselves. And in fact, that there is a need as artists nowadays, as independent doc filmmakers, to be able to learn how to be able to brand ourselves in our films.
It's hard because I think most filmmakers, and this is a generalization, but most filmmakers, I would say, are generally introverts.
Yeah.
And, just by nature. And so, and I'm essentially one as well, and I feel all your pain. Everyone else's pain, I feel it, and, what you have to, think about, like, what can you find joyous in, kind of, and maybe don't look at it as marketing yourself, but just kind of connecting with a natural audience.
Yeah.
Like, who is that audience of your, who is out there that is, wants to be connected with, that you want to connect with. And just, and it's hard. It's a tough slog, especially in this kind of very noisy, crowded landscape, that media crowded landscape, but, just find people that you are like-minded with, to share their material, make it kind of something natural that is something natural that you do, and slowly, develop your audience that way. In terms of the film, that's why it's easier to develop an audience as a person, as an individual person, than for a film.
Yeah.
I mean, very few people like film pages these days on Facebook, and, but you can get them to do that. But so you have to do it for both, essentially. I'm starting a project now, and the artist who I'm doing the documentary about already has a Facebook page, and I don't know whether I'm going to do a Facebook page for the film. I might just use their Facebook page, and because it's like at least for now, they're the ones that already are. That's the audience, the initial audience already.
Yeah.
That's the super core of the audience.
Yeah.
Why it's going to be very difficult to get those people to come over. Eventually they might, but it's going to be harder to get those people to come over to and follow a new Facebook page.
Yeah, they're already engaged in this other page.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that doesn't always happen. So and the thing is that now, because of the emphasis on paid advertising and paid social, or not the emphasis, it's now that the social platforms want you to pay to reach your audience.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to do anything organically, through organic social media.
Yeah.
And the advantage of that is that if you have money and you've budgeted money for paid social media advertising, you don't have to worry as much about building up an audience in advance. But it is good to have at least some base. I did a fair amount of research on this recently, and the people I spoke with, it's good to have 1,000 to 2,000 people to get like some sense of what that audience looks like, so that it makes your targeting a little bit more effective. So.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about that, John. How does social media fit into all of this marketing? And I ask you that from the perspective of maybe for even the uninitiated, where on earth do we start with this landscape of using social media for our films?
Well, I would start just using it yourself. And developing your own audience on Facebook, and whichever platform you prefer. And makes most sense for you. And also potentially, if you're going to have a consistent audience, what that audience potentially uses.
Right.
Do they use Facebook? And it's pretty easy to link. If you do post on Instagram now, it'll link to your Facebook account. Like I have it set up so I have a personal Instagram and a personal Facebook. link those. And then I have a business Instagram and a business Facebook, and I link those, and I'll post some stuff on one and not on the other. Sometimes I'll post the same thing on both, depending on what it is. It's a little bit difficult to learn how to use Facebook Business Manager, but it's not impossible. If you get really good at it, then you can hire yourself out, because everyone needs someone who knows how to use Facebook Business Manager, who will work freelance and not too expensively. So hint, if you have some love of data and numbers and feel like you're good at that, there's a definite job niche waiting for you. And if you develop those skills, let me know, because I'm always looking for people like that.
Wow.
To work on projects. But it's really, I don't think you should go out and just boost your posts like through the Facebook front end. I would always recommend doing it through Business Manager, because that's where you can track things. That's where you can target specific audiences.
Yeah.
It's pretty robust, and but it takes a certain amount of knowledge. I mean, I worked on a film last year. My whole 2018 was working just on one film, and I think we ended up by the end of the year, and we had an ad person on board, and an ad budget, and relatively modest ad budget. And we created a fair amount of social content, and we ended up having, I think, 500,000, 100% video views by the time the campaign was done.
Wow.
I think something like a 20 million reach. It was like pretty crazy numbers.
And how many people were working on that Facebook business end to be able to be doing this?
Well, it was one
Facebook
person
manager.
handling the manager, and he wasn't doing it full time. He was doing it as a part time. You don't need to do it full time. You can do multiple campaigns part time.
Okay.
But then we were also creating extra content, new content for social media. So, and we probably created a lot, maybe more than we needed to.
Yeah.
But part of the social, there was something about the audience when we did some audience surveys of the film early on. They wanted to know the film was about the origins of the Baha'i faith, and people wanted to know what was going on now. So we ended up kind of, I talked to the filmmakers and said, like, this could be kind of a bit of a transmedia campaign in which we shoot contemporary people talking about this. And that's part of what promotes the film and lives on social media. So that's what we did. We created a decent amount of content. And so that was a pretty robust effort in that regard. And here's another thing. If you're pursuing this path, make sure you budget not just for a trailer, but also for a 30-second spot and a 15-second spot. Even just cut down versions of your trailer, because no one's going to watch in an ad a 3-minute piece. They're going to watch a 15-second piece of content or a 30-second piece of content. So try to make that part of your trailer package when you're creating your trailer or doing it yourself.
You mentioned the idea of the boost post option in Facebook, and I think that's a mistake that I know I have made. It's a mistake I think a lot of our listeners have made, and I've seen it in our TDL community Facebook group page, where people are wondering, look, how can I market, my film or my film's page more? Is it, or even, the trailer you just mentioned? Do I simply use the boost post? Because that doesn't seem to garner much of anything.
The only time, like, I recently boosted a post through the boost post thing, but it was someone else's. It's because we tried to create an ad with it, and because it was, even though I was in the article, if I try to boost this podcast, because it's your content, now Facebook doesn't allow me to boost it anymore.
Wow.
Through Business Manager. I could boost it on my page, and then hence we don't get the metrics, and we just did it to see like what kind of reach we would get with it. But if it's your own original content, I would strongly recommend finding someone who knows how to use Facebook Business Manager. Make that part of your, marketing plan. I would make that as, basically a social ad person should be probably more a part of your. Should be, if you had a choice between organic social media and ad-based social media, I would go with the ads.
Especially, yeah.
Yeah, and then just you have to, if you don't know how to do that, just like if you don't know how to edit, you hire an editor. It goes back to the whole thing that, distribution and marketing are underfunded, under budgeted. People don't budget for it in their budgets and don't save money for it. And, you really have to think about, maybe it's not 50-50, like I said in my book, but it's, somewhere in there you have to allot 30%, of your budget for this. And unless you're, because it's not fun to be doing all this work by yourself at the end when you've already finished the whole film.
Yeah, isn't that right?
And I feel all your pain out there. I've done it. So
Yeah.
I know what it's like. Yeah.
What are some of the common mistakes you see filmmakers making when they're trying to use social media? What are some of the mistakes that are happening out there that we should know about?
I would say the main mistake would be to rely on, the biggest mistake would be to not use social media.
Yeah.
The second biggest mistake would be to rely on organic social media. Although within certain communities, that can also really work well. Like some communities, you can get organic engagement going. And if you keep it going, it can, but you really eventually, have to learn how to pay for ads, because eventually Facebook's going to come along, or it's the same thing. They're going to come along and say, we're not letting you talk to your audience anymore unless you pay us.
Exactly. Yeah. It's funny because early on of course, we're in Cambodia finishing work on our documentary film, which we've been working on for over 5 years now, Elvis of Cambodia. And very early on, we ran a Kickstarter campaign to first get us over here and begin working on the film. And at the time, Facebook hadn't changed a bunch of their algorithms. And the amount of organic interaction that we were having with our Facebook page was amazing. And we were able to garner a lot of activity on the Facebook page and a lot of likes very early on in the film's journey. And that's, within the first year or two of the film. And I would say the last 3 years, the amount of organic activity and the amount of likes that we've garnered has been nothing compared to that first year. And it's because of the changes that Facebook has made.
Yeah. Yep.
So, John, what are we leaving out of this conversation here in marketing that you feel like, Chris, your doc filmmakers need to know about this and that maybe we haven't talked about yet?
Conferences maybe, which go along with partnerships, and in a sense that even before if there's conferences that relate to the subject of your film, consider going to them before your film's finished. And that's a way to network with people and also to establish relationships for going to those conferences when the film is finished.
Yeah.
And maybe not screening the entire film there, maybe being there as a speaker when the film's done and showing a clip from the film, and there could be multiple conferences. So I would say that's a decent chunk. And also, we haven't talked about press that much. Some filmmakers are pretty good about even going out and calling up journalists and getting press themselves. How much you pay for publicity and when you pay for publicity is, tricky. There are some publicists that work, for a little bit less than traditional. If you go to a major festival, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
And it depends on how press important your film is, or is your film a film that's going to garner press or not? And so not to worry about, for all of these avenues, again, it's a matter of here's the way, who is your audience? And then how does that audience perceive information, right? And how do you connect? So some people will get it through press, not everyone. Yeah. Other people get it through their information from social media. Yeah. How? Through whom? Through their friends, referrals, or from pages and organizations that they follow. Some people will get it through email. I guess the one thing we haven't talked about is email and the importance of building your email list.
Yeah.
And that still trumps social media in terms of conversion.
In fact, we had the CEO of ConvertKit on the program a short while ago talking all about email marketing, and that will go hand in hand with this episode for sure.
Yeah. So, and then, your website and having a place and where you can convert people. Yeah. It's also important to have a website that provides engagement in some way or gives people a way to interact with the film. so that when, because what you're doing with your Facebook ads is most likely driving them to your website and trying to get people to go to the website and potentially sign up for your email list.
Right.
Hopefully you've done that, because you could send people to your website. Why am I sending them to my website? What are you trying to get from them?
Yeah.
What's the goal? So early on, it should be, getting people to sign up for an email list. If you can get people to engage with you on social media, that's great, and you can keep that going. But, email lists are still pretty important.
John, how can someone reach out to you if they're interested in consultation services?
So they can go, I actually have a new website. It's called 8 Above. It's the number 8 and then Above, ABOVE. I'm sure will you be able to have a link?
Yeah, we'll link to any of this information up on the show notes for this episode. Absolutely.
Yeah. So they can go there, and there's a form, if they go to the distribution and marketing page, there's a form that they can fill out. Also, people can just, email me at john@8above.com. And, but it's better if you can fill out the form. That's better, because the first thing I'm going to do if you reach out to me via email is say, hey, can you fill out the form?
Yeah, right.
Because it allows me to have all the information for all my clients, possible clients and then clients in one place, and I can take notes there, and it's all just, it's all there.
John Reese, it's been a pleasure having you on the program. It's always an insightful conversation, and a lot of doc filmmakers gain great value from your words of wisdom, if you will. So thank you so much again for being on The Documentary Life.
Thank you so much, Chris. Happy to.
And don't forget, we'd love to have you join us in our next Doc Lifer Elite Mastermind group on Monday, March 2nd. For details and to apply, go to thedocumentarylife.com/mastermind. Thanks again for listening to the show, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, remember, for any of the URLs that may or may not be outdated and you want to get the most up-to-date information, perhaps for the documentary filmmaking courses, for the blog, for other episodes, just go ahead and check in the show notes below on this YouTube page, and that'll give you the correct URLs to use. Thanks again. Have a great day.